Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the UA traitor? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world dissolved into a cacophony of fear. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was standing on the precipice of his dreams, listening to the Pro Hero 13 explain the intricacies of rescue training. The next, the very air seemed to curdle. A vortex of swirling black and violet corruption bloomed in the heart of the unforeseen simulation joint's central plaza, a malignant nebula spitting out nightmares, villains. Dozens of them. They poured from the warp gate like bile from a wound, a tide of leering grins, grotesque mutations, and gleaming, malicious eyes. Panic erupted around him. His classmates, the best and brightest of UA's hero course, shouted in alarm and confusion. Ida was already organizing, Kirishima was hardening his fists, his face a mask of grim determination. They saw a surprise attack. A trial by fire. Izuku saw a script playing out exactly as he'd been told it would. They are here. Just as you promised. The voice was not a sound. It was a pressure in the hollows of his skull, a cold, smooth presence that had taken up permanent residence in the back of his mind. It was the voice of his other master, his true master, the one who had found him when he was nothing but a quirkless, broken boy with a shattered dream. Observe, Izuku. Watch the first act of the play you helped set. He felt a tremor run through his hands, a vibration that had nothing to do with One for All. It was pure, unadulterated terror. Not just for himself, but for every single person here. For Uraraka, whose wide eyes were fixed on the horde. For Ida, whose rigid posture betrayed the frantic thrumming of his heart. For All Might, who wasn't here. A lie. The schedule Izuku had so painstakingly copied and delivered, the one he triple-checked under the phantom gaze of his benefactor, had stated All Might would be here. A jolt of icy betrayal, not from a villain but towards them, shot through him. Had Sensei lied to Shigaraki? Or was this part of a larger, more complex test? Kurogyri, separate them and dispose of them. A voice rasped from the center of the plaza. The man covered in disembodied hands, Tamura Shigaraki, scratched his neck with a feverish intensity that made Izuku's own skin crawl. Izuku knew that name. He knew the name of the warp villain, Kurogyri. He knew their objective. To kill All Might. His stomach churned with acid. He was a part of this. A vital, knowledgeable, treacherous part. Before Aizawa-sensei could finish his command to evacuate, the black mist that was Kurogyri exploded outwards. It was a sentient fog, a living shadow that swallowed the light and the air. Izuku's mind raced, a frantic catalogue of threats and positions. He couldn't warn them. He couldn't shout, "Don't let it touch you!" without revealing himself. To do so would be to sign his mother's death warrant. The images Sensei had shown him, grainy, long-distance photos of Inko Midoriya at the grocery store, hanging laundry, walking home from work, flashed behind his eyes, a silent, ever-present threat. So he did the only thing he could. As the mist surged towards them, he saw it angling to engulf the group clustered near the door. Tsuya Ajiri was the closest to his right. In a motion that looked like a panic stumble, a clumsy loss of footing in the face of terror, Izuku fell sideways. He bumped into her, hard. Not enough to hurt, but enough to push her a full 2 steps to the left, out of the direct path of a grasping tendril of darkness. Her surprised ribbit was lost in the chaos. He felt a flicker of satisfaction, a tiny spark of defiance in the roaring inferno of his guilt. It was a pathetic, minuscule act of rebellion, but it was his. Then, the world was gone. Darkness. A sensation of falling, twisting, tumbling through a cold, empty void. He heard Minetta's terrified screaming somewhere nearby and felt a brief, selfish pang of relief that he wasn't alone. The landing was a violent splash. Icy water shocked the air from his lungs, closing over his head. For a paralyzing second, he was back in the grip of the sludge villain, helpless and drowning. He thrashed, breaking the surface, gasping for breath. The ceiling of the USJ, a massive glass dome, glittered far above. He was in the shipwreck zone. Midoriya! He turned to see Tsuyu's head bobbing in the water, her expression characteristically calm despite the circumstances. A short distance away, Mineta was clinging to his own floating purple balls, sobbing hysterically. Are you two okay? Izuku sputtered, treading water. I'm fine, Ribbit, Tsuyu said. This is actually kind of my element. Mineta seems less fine. We're gonna die. We're gonna be fish food. My beautiful, popular life is over before it even began. Mineta wailed. A shadow fell over them. The water churned as villains surfaced, their forms aquatic and monstrous. A shark man with rows of serrated teeth, a squid-like creature with lashing tentacles, a man with gills flaring on his neck. They were closing in, creating a circle, their expressions predatory. Their quirks are suited for this environment. Izuku's mind supplied, the analytical part of him that he'd honed for years clicking into place. They were sent here intentionally. Kurogiri didn't just scatter us randomly. He placed us in zones where we'd be at a disadvantage. Excellent analysis, my boy, the voice of All for One whispered, a phantom caress against his consciousness. You see the board so clearly. A useful trait. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block it out. The praise felt like a physical blow. He had to focus. He had to be a hero. It was the only way to keep the guilt from eating him alive. They don't know our quirks, Izuku said, his voice shaking but finding a thread of resolve. If they did, they would have separated you, Azuri. They would have known you have the advantage here. Tsuyu's large eyes blinked. You're right. They think we're just a bunch of kids who fell in the water, so we have a chance. Izuku continued, a plan forming. His gaze flickered between the villains, noting their numbers, their positions, the overconfidence in their smirks. Mineta! Your quirk, what about it? Mineta shrieked. They're just sticky balls. I can't defeat them with sticky balls. You don't have to defeat them. Just throw them. As many as you can, all over the water. Izuku yelled, the urgency overriding his fear. He, meanwhile, had one for all. But to use it here, in the water, without a solid surface, was a massive risk. A full-power smash would shatter his bones, leaving him helpless. He needed one shot, one perfect, overwhelming blow. Tsuyu understood immediately. I see. You're going to create a trap. She dove beneath the surface, her powerful legs propelling her through the water like a torpedo. Mineta, still crying, began ripping the balls from his head and flinging them wildly. They bobbed on the surface, a strange purple minefield. The villains laughed. What's this? Is the little pervert going to make us stick together? The shark man sneered. That was the opening. Overconfidence. Their greatest weakness. Izuku took a deep breath, the cold water seeping into his bones. He focused on the power thrumming beneath his skin, the cosmic energy gifted to him by the man he was currently betraying. He channeled it, not into his whole arm, but into the tip of a single finger. Red veins of light spiderwebbed across his skin, a painful, beautiful lattice of pure power. Don't damage the vessel, Izuku. It is still so fragile. The voice was a warning, cold and uncaring. He ignored it. He had to. This was his atonement. Azuri, now! He screamed. Tsuyu burst from the water beneath the boat in the center of the zone, her long tongue shooting out and wrapping around him. With a powerful tug, she launched him into the air. He flew in a high arc, soaring over the water, over the villains, over Mineta's sticky traps. He pointed his finger at the center of the water's surface. Delaware smash! The world exploded in a concussive boom. A colossal pillar of air pressure slammed down onto the water. The force was cataclysmic. The entire surface of the shipwreck zone imploded, creating a massive, swirling whirlpool. The villains, caught completely by surprise, were sucked down into the vortex. They collided with each other, with the debris, with Mineta's inescapable spheres, becoming a tangled, helpless mass pulled towards the drain at the bottom of the facility. The recoil shattered his finger. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up his arm. His other hand was fractured, too, from the sheer force of the blow. He cried out, his body flailing in the air. But Tsuyu was there. Her tongue lashed out again, catching him and pulling him towards the relative safety of the boat as Mineta used his own balls to climb aboard. They collapsed onto the deck, breathing heavily. The water below was calm again, the villains gone. They had done it. They had survived. A wave of dizziness washed over Izuku. The pain in his mangled fingers was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache in his chest. He had fought like a hero. He had protected his friends, and every second of it was a lie. A rather flashy display, Sensei's voice noted with detached amusement. Wasteful, but effective. You have gathered good data on the frog girl and the grape boy. Now, the main event is beginning. It is time for you to return to the plaza. Izuku gritted his teeth, cradling his broken hand. He looked at Tsuyu and Mineta. They were looking back at him with awe. That was amazing, Midoriya! Mineta sniffled, tears of relief now streaming down his face. You were like boom! And they were like gurgle gurgle. Your quirk is incredible, Tsuyu said, her gaze steady and serious. But you always hurt yourself when you use it. You need to be more careful. Her genuine concern was a knife in his gut. I'm fine, he stammered. We need to see what's happening. We need to find Aizawa-sensei. His words were a prophecy of doom. They made their way carefully from the shipwreck zone, their adrenaline-fueled victory already fading into a grim apprehension. The sounds of fighting from other zones were sporadic, but a palpable sense of dread hung over the entire facility. As they neared the entrance, the central plaza came into view, and the sight made Izuku's blood run cold. It was a scene from a nightmare. Villains lay scattered unconscious, a testament to Aizawa-sensei's terrifying efficiency. But their teacher was not standing victorious. He was on the ground, pinned beneath a hulking, grotesque creature. The thing was a mountain of muscle, its skin a dark, scarred purple, its brain exposed and pulsating, its eyes blank and dead like a doll's. Anomu, behold Izuku. The pinnacle of my creations. A purpose-built anti-symbol of peace. Aizawa's arm was bent at an unnatural angle, the bone clearly snapped. His other arm was trapped. His head was being slammed repeatedly into the stone floor by the creature's massive hand, the sickening crunches echoing in the cavernous space. Shigaraki was standing over him, giggling, a hand scratching furiously at his throat. You're so cool, Eraserhead! Shigaraki rasped, his voice giddy and unhinged. But you're no match for Noma. He's been engineered to withstand All Might at 100%. What chance did you ever have? Izuku froze, his breath catching in his throat. This was his fault. This was the direct, bloody, undeniable consequence of his betrayal. The schedule. The staff roster. The quirk analysis he'd provided on Eraserhead, theorizing that his power would be less effective against a foe with a simple mutation-type quirk of overwhelming physical strength. He had written the blueprint for his teacher's destruction. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight that buckled his knees. He wanted to scream. He wanted to vomit. He wanted to run in there and tear the Nomu apart with his bare hands, even if it meant turning every bone in his body to dust. But he was just a boy with two broken hands and a borrowed power he couldn't control. The Nomu lifted Aizawa's head for another slam, but Shigaraki held up a hand. Wait. Let's see. Oh, his elbow is crumbling. I just saw it. He let out another childish, horrifying laugh. This is fun. Tsuyu let out a small, choked gasp beside him. Mineta was trembling so violently Izuku could hear his teeth chattering. They were hidden, for now, partially submerged in the water at the edge of the plaza, but Shigaraki's head was starting to turn. His gaze swept the area, searching for more players. Izuku knew, with chilling certainty, that they were about to be discovered. Then, the Nomu turned its blank stare from Aizawa and fixed it directly on their hiding spot. It had sensed them. Shigaraki's head snapped in their direction, a manic grin spreading across his chapped lips. Oh? More party guests? Kurojiri, you missed a few. Time seemed to slow down. The Nomu released Aizawa, whose head slumped to the ground, a pool of blood forming around him. The creature took one step, then two, its movements unnaturally fast for its size. It was coming for them. Tsuyu's tongue shot out, not in attack, but to push Mineta further back. A hero to the last. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom. Run. Fight. Use one for all. You'll die. He'll kill you. He'll kill them. It's my fault, my fault, my fault. Do not interfere, the voice of AFO commanded, sharp and absolute. Your role is to observe. But he couldn't. He couldn't stand here and watch his friends be murdered by the monster he had helped unleash. The core of him, the small, quirkless boy who had thrown his backpack at the sludge villain to save Kakin, screamed in defiance. In that instant, he was not a traitor. He was not a pawn. He was a hero. He launched himself from the water, a desperate, broken missile aimed at an immovable object. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have the strength. All he had was a suicidal, selfless rage. He pulled back his uninjured arm, ready to pour every last, self-destructive ounce of one for all into a punch that would annihilate him. He would never reach it. Shigaraki moved with a speed that belied his lanky frame. He appeared in front of the Nomu, his hand outstretched, palm open. "Don't touch my monster, you little cheat!" His fingers were inches from Izuku's face. Izuku could see the dry, cracked skin, could smell the faint, dusty odor coming off him. He knew what that quirk was. Decay. One touch and he would crumble into dust. This was it. He was going to die. A part of him, the part drowning in guilt, welcomed it. Boom! The doors to the USJ burst inward, ripped from their hinges as if by a hurricane. A figure stood silhouetted against the bright daylight, a colossal shape of muscle and hope. He wasn't smiling. His face was a thunderous mask of incandescent fury. "It's fine now." The voice boomed, a sound that resonated not just in the air, but in the very soul of every hero in training present. "Because I am here, All Might." The relief that flooded Izuku's system was so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. It was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated joy that his friends were safe, that help had arrived, that the nightmare was over, and right behind it came the second wave. A wave of shame so profound it felt like drowning. His savior was here. His idol. The man who had given him his dream. And Izuku had led a pack of wolves to his door. He stood there, frozen, caught between the villain who wanted to kill him and the hero he had betrayed. He was a fraud. A hypocrite. Unworthy to even stand in the shadow of All Might's presence. All Might moved in a blur, a streak of red, white and blue. He scooped up the injured Aizawa, snatched Izuku, Tsuyu, and Mineta, and deposited them a safe distance away in less than a second. The sheer velocity was staggering. "Take Aizawa-sensei to the entrance, young ones," All Might commanded, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't look at them. His furious gaze was locked on Shigaraki and the Noma. "He doesn't have much time." Izuku couldn't move. He could only stare. Tsuyu and Mineta, snapping out of their shock, carefully lifted Aizawa, their faces pale and streaked with grime. Izuku's feet felt rooted to the spot. He was watching a scene he had orchestrated. He was an unwilling director, forced to watch his own horror movie from the front row. The fight began. It was not a fight. It was a collision of gods. All Might's fists were meteors, his movements blurs of impossible speed. But the Noma took it. Every punch, every blow that could level a city block, was absorbed. The creature didn't even flinch. It just hit back with raw, brutal strength. "My Nomu has shock absorption, All Might!" Shigaraki cackled from the sidelines. "A fun little quirk, isn't it? And super regeneration," Sensei's voice added clinically in Izuku's mind. "You see how your information was put to good use. We knew your teacher's weakness was brute force. We designed the perfect counter." Izuku felt sick. All Might was landing blow after blow, but the Noma was healing, its torn flesh knitting back together, its broken bones snapping back into place. All Might was getting tired. He was reaching his limit. Izuku knew about the time limit, the terrible wound, the secret weakness of the symbol of peace. And he knew, with a certainty that felt like a block of ice in his stomach, that Shigaraki knew it too. Because he had told Sensei. All of it. The fight escalated. A suplex that cracked the very foundations of the building. A flurry of punches so fast they broke the sound barrier. All Might was fighting with a desperation Izuku had never seen, a ferocity born of protecting his students. Of protecting him. "You were made to be a living sandbag." All Might grunted, locked in a grapple with the seemingly tireless monster. "Exactly!" Shigaraki cheered. "All to kill you!" Izuku watched, his broken fingers throbbing in time with his panicked heartbeat. He had to do something. Anything. he saw Kirishima, Bakugo, and Todoroki arrive, a desperate, brave, and foolish charge to aid their hero. Their intervention was a brief but crucial distraction, allowing All Might a moment to reassess. A true hero always finds a way to break out of a pinch! All Might roared, his voice straining. He had figured it out. Shock absorption wasn't nullification. There had to be a limit. He's going to surpass its limit, Izuku realized. He's going to go beyond 100%. The final exchange was apocalyptic. You may have heard these words before. All Might bellowed, his body steaming, his muscles bulging with an impossible amount of power. But I'll teach you what they really mean. He unleashed a storm of punches, each one faster and stronger than the last. Go beyond! Plus, Ultra! The final punch was not a punch. It was an extinction-level event. The air pressure it generated was a physical wall, a shockwave that blasted the Nomu up through the dome of the USJ, sending it soaring into the sky until it was a mere twinkle, then nothing at all. Silence. The wind howled through the shattered dome. All Might stood in the center of a crater, steam pouring off his body, his form flickering, threatening to revert. Victory. The other pro-heroes arrived in a flood of sound and authority. The remaining villains were rounded up. Shigaraki, screaming in frustration as he was shot multiple times by Snipe, was warped away by Kurojiiri at the last second. It was over. Students were being accounted for, their faces a mixture of relief, shock, and exhaustion. Medical staff were tending to the injured. Izuku stood numbly, watching them carry Aizawa-sensei away on a stretcher, his entire body bandaged, his life hanging by a thread. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Kirishima. Midoriya, man, you were incredible, he said, his usual bright smile a little shaky. When you made that whirlpool? So manly. We saw it from the landslide zone. The praise felt like hot coals on his skin. Izuku couldn't meet his eyes. He just stared at the bloodstain on the ground where his teacher had fallen. I didn't do anything, he mumbled, the words tasting like ash. He felt utterly, completely alone. He was surrounded by his friends and teachers, by the very people he had dreamed of fighting alongside, and he had never been more isolated. He was an island of deceit in an ocean of heroism. Later, as they were being escorted out of the ruined facility, All Might, back in his skeletal form and hidden from view, caught his eye. The hero gave him a small, tired, but incredibly proud nod. A nod that said, "You did well, my boy." Izuku's heart fractured. He managed a weak, trembling smile in return, a mask of gratitude hiding a chasm of self-loathing. He walked toward the bus, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had survived. His friends had survived. All Might had won. But it wasn't a victory. It was a reprieve. He had passed the test. He had performed his function. And as he took his seat, the adrenaline finally gone, leaving behind only the bone-deep weariness and the cold, crushing guilt, the voice returned. It was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, calm, and proprietary tone, speaking directly into the core of his being. A master, pleased with his tool. An excellent performance, Izuku. The data gathered today is invaluable. The symbol of peace is more fragile than I imagined, and Tamura has learned a valuable lesson. You have done well. The voice paused, letting the words sink in, letting the horror of them take root. Congratulations on a successful first assignment. The first thing Izuku became aware of was the smell. It was a sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic that scrubbed the air clean of the phantom stench of blood and ozone from the USJ. The second was the starched stiffness of the sheets pulled up to his chin. The third was the pain. It was a dull, profound throb emanating from his left hand, where his index and middle fingers were now encased in a thick cast. His right hand ached with a similar, though lesser, agony. He welcomed the pain. It was a physical anchor in a sea of psychological torment, a righteous punishment that felt earned. Every pulse of agony was a reminder of what he had done, a penance far too small for the crime he had committed against his teacher, against his friends, against his own soul. He was in the nurse's office at UA. Recovery girl, after planting a weary kiss on his forehead that sent a wave of restorative energy through him, knitting together the microfractures but leaving the major breaks to heal naturally, had tut-tuted about his recklessness before moving on to the next student. The room was filled with the low murmurs of his classmates, a soft tapestry of relief and lingering shock. Midoriya? Are you awake? He cracked his eyes open. Uraraka was standing by his cot, her face etched with concern. Ida stood beside her, his arm in a sling, but his posture as rigid and formal as ever. Hey! Izuku croaked, his throat dry. You were incredible back there, Deku! Uraraka said, her voice filled with a genuine, sparkling awe that made him want to shrink into nothingness. That move with the water! It was just, whoa! You saved Azri and Mineta. Indeed! Ida chopped the air with his good arm. Your quick thinking and decisive action in the face of overwhelming odds were the embodiment of plus ultra. You demonstrated profound courage. The word echoed in the empty cavern of his chest. They were praising him for cleaning up a fraction of the mess he had created. It was like praising an arsonist for rescuing a teacup from a burning orphanage. The hypocrisy was a thick, cloying bile rising in his throat. He felt a desperate need to confess, to scream the truth until his lungs bled, to tell them that the only thing he demonstrated was a traitor's cowardice. But the cold presence in the back of his mind, currently dormant but never truly gone, kept his lips sealed. The phantom images of his mother, blissfully unaware, were a more effective gag than any villain's quirk. I just got lucky, he stammered, casting his eyes down at the white sheets. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't bear to see their honest, trusting faces. Aizawa-sensei, is he? Ida's expression tightened. He is in surgery. The doctors are optimistic, but his injuries were severe. Both arms were shattered, and he suffered extensive facial fractures. It is a miracle he is alive! A miracle I almost prevented, Izuku's mind screamed. He could see it again, the image of his teacher's head being slammed into the concrete, the sound of bone crunching, the information he had provided, the analysis of Erasure's limits against a physical powerhouse, had been the blueprint for that very torture. You should not blame yourself, Midoriya, Ida said, misinterpreting his haunted expression as survivor's guilt. You did everything you could. You are a hero. That was the final straw. The word, spoken with such earnest conviction, was not a comfort. It was a branding iron searing his conscience. Hero. The title he had craved his entire life now felt like a curse, a mockery of the highest order. The disparity between their perception and his reality was a chasm so vast he felt himself falling into it, tumbling back through time, back to a moment when that word had been stolen from him, leaving a void so perfect it had been ripe for a devil to fill. The sterile scent of the nurse's office faded, replaced by the memory of rain-slicked asphalt and the metallic tang of despair. The concerned faces of his friends dissolved, blurring into the gray, indifferent skyline of Muzurifu. The dull throb in his fingers became a sharp, soul-deep ache that had once defined his entire existence. He was 14 again. The world had ended on a rooftop. It hadn't ended with a bang or a villain's cackle, but with 6 simple, soul-crushing words from the one man he revered above all others. You cannot be a hero. All Might's voice, though kind, had been a sledgehammer to the delicate glass of Izuku's dream. The words echoed, refracting and multiplying in the silence of his walk home. He didn't remember the journey. He remembered the feeling of his feet moving on the pavement, the sight of his worn-out red shoes scuffing against the concrete, but the world around him was a muted, colorless blur. The vibrant city, usually a playground for his hero-sighting fantasies, was now just a collection of gray buildings and faceless people, all of whom had something he didn't. A quirk. A chance. A future. He'd arrived home, the familiar smell of his mother's cooking doing nothing to soothe the gaping wound in his chest. Inko had taken one look at his face, at the deadness in his eyes, and had known. He numbly pointed to the computer screen, to the old video of All Might's debut, the one he had watched 10,000 times. He saved 100 people, with a smile. He'd whispered, his voice cracking. He's so cool. He turned to her, the tears finally breaking free, a torrent of grief for a dream that had just been pronounced dead. Mom, can I be a hero too? He was begging. Begging for her to undo what All Might had done. To lie to him. To give him anything to hold on to. Inko had just wrapped her arms around him, her own tears soaking his hair as she repeated the same words she'd said a decade ago. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. It was the second time those words had broken him. The days that followed were a waking purgatory. Aldera Junior High was a crucible of casual cruelty. Bakugo's sneers of quirkless loser and Deku were no longer just painful. They were statements of fact, verdicts handed down by the symbol of peace himself. The teacher's pitying glances, the other students' snickers, it all blended into a suffocating white noise of failure. He'd stopped writing in his hero analysis notebooks. What was the point? It was like a flightless bird meticulously studying aerodynamics. A cruel, pointless exercise in self-torture. His ambition, once a roaring bonfire that had kept him warm in the face of ridicule, had been extinguished. All that remained were cold ashes. It was on one such gray afternoon, a week after the rooftop incident, that he found himself sitting on a park bench overlooking a drab, concrete riverbed. He wasn't going home. He couldn't face his mother's worried eyes, couldn't bear the weight of her sadness on top of his own. So he just sat, watching the murky water flow sluggishly by, an apt metaphor for his own life. A heavy burden for such young shoulders. The voice was smooth, deep, and unexpectedly gentle. Izuku flinched, looking up. A man had taken a seat at the other end of the bench. He was impeccably dressed in a simple but clearly expensive black suit, his dark hair neatly combed. His face was unremarkable in its features but possessed an unnerving stillness, a placid calm that felt ancient. But what struck Izuku most were his eyes. They were dark, intelligent, and held a look of profound, almost paternal, empathy. There was no pity in them. Only understanding. Izuku mumbled an apology, assuming he was in the way. Not at all, my boy. Forgive me for intruding, the man said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. I just happened to notice the look in your eyes. I've seen it before. It's the look of someone who has had their most cherished dream declared impossible. Izuku stared at him, stunned into silence. The man hadn't just seen his sadness. He had diagnosed it with surgical precision. You want to be a hero, don't you? The man continued, his gaze never leaving Izuku's. More than anything. It's not about fame or fortune. It's a fire in your soul, a burning, desperate need to save people, to stand between the innocent and the darkness. He was speaking Izuku's heart aloud. He was articulating the very core of his being, a core Izuku thought no one else could see. A sob caught in Izuku's throat. I can't, he whispered, the words scraping his raw vocal cords. I'm quirkless. He expected the man's expression to change. He expected the flicker of pity, the gentle dismissal, the same look he got from everyone. Instead, the man simply nodded, as if this were a minor, treatable ailment. Society can be tragically short-sighted, he said, his tone turning contemplative. It places so much value on the lottery of birth, on these quirks, that it fails to recognize true worth. It discards diamonds because they are not yet polished. Tell me, young man, what is your name? Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. A pleasure, Midoriya-kun, the man said with a small, reassuring smile. He gestured vaguely at himself. You may call me Sensei. Everyone does, Sensei. Teacher. The title felt right. This man, in the span of 2 minutes, had shown him more understanding than anyone in his entire life. The world tells you that power is a prerequisite for heroism. Sensei continued, his voice hypnotic and compelling. That without a quirk, you are useless, a Deku. But I believe that the will, the spirit, is the true source of power. The quirk is merely a tool. A man with the soul of a hero and an empty toolbox is still a hero. A man with a powerful tool and the soul of a villain is just a monster. Izuku listened, captivated. It was everything he had ever wanted to hear. It was the validation he had been screaming for his entire life. What if I told you? Sensei said, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping to an intimate, conspiratorial level. That the toolbox does not have to remain empty. What if I told you that a quirk is not just a gift of birth, but something that can be bestowed? Izuku's heart stopped. What do you mean? I have a unique ability, Midoriya-kun. A gift. I can give quirks to others. He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, as if he were offering to lend him a pen. I find those with the potential for greatness, those discarded by a callous world, and I give them the chance they were denied. I give them the tool they need to achieve their destiny. It was impossible. A lie. A cruel prank. Quirks were genetic. They were biological. You couldn't just give one to someone. But the look in Sensei's eyes, there was no deceit there, only a calm, absolute certainty. And Izuku, who had nothing left to lose, found a desperate, treacherous seed of hope beginning to sprout in the barren soil of his heart. Why? Izuku asked, his voice trembling. Why would you for me? Because I see you, Izuku Midoriya, Sensei said, using his first name for the first time. It felt strangely personal. I see a fire that the number one hero himself tried, and failed, to extinguish. A spirit like that deserves a chance. It deserves to burn brightly. He stood up, his tall frame blocking out the fading afternoon light. He extended a hand. It was a normal hand, pale and well manicured. It held no crackling energy, no ominous glow. It was just a hand. I can give you a quirk. Not a powerful, flashy one that will draw unwanted attention. Something subtle. Something to get your foot in the door. The rest will be up to your spirit, your intelligence, your will. All I ask in return is that you use it to achieve your dream. Become the hero you were always meant to be. That will be payment enough for me. Izuku's mind was a whirlwind. This had to be a trick. It was too good to be true. But, what if it wasn't? What if this was it? The one miracle he had been praying for. The world had taken everything from him. This man was offering to give it back. His dream, dangling by a thread, was right there, within reach. All he had to do was take it. His desperation warred with a lifetime of harsh reality. But desperation won. It always did. Slowly, hesitantly, he stood up. He looked at Sensei's outstretched hand, then at his own empty, quirkless ones. He thought of Bakugo's explosions, of All Might's power, of the chasm that separated him from his dream. And he made his choice. He reached out and took the man's hand. It was cool and dry. Sensei smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. A wise decision. He placed his other hand on Izuku's forehead. It was surprisingly gentle. This will not hurt, just a small spark to light the flame. Think of it as a gift. Izuku felt a strange warmth spread from the man's palm, a tingling sensation that flowed down his spine and settled deep within his core. It wasn't painful. It felt like coming home, like a missing piece of his soul slotting into place. The feeling lasted only a few seconds, and then it was gone. Sensei withdrew his hands. It is done. Izuku felt no different. He looked at his hands, expecting them to glow or change, but they were the same as always. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, began to curdle his hope. Look at that discarded kin by the railing, Sensei said softly. Focus on it. Don't try to lift it. Just nudge it. With your will. Izuku stared at the crumpled aluminum can. It felt foolish. But he did as he was told. He focused, pouring all his desperate hope and concentration onto the small, metal object. He imagined a thread of energy extending from him, pushing against it. The can wobbled. It was barely a millimeter of movement, but it was there. Izuku gasped, his heart hammering against his ribs. He focused again, harder this time. The can tilted, then rolled off the concrete ledge and clattered onto the path below. A laugh, raw and joyous, burst from Izuku's lips. It was a sound he hadn't made in years. Tears streamed down his face, but for the first time in his life, they were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. I have a quirk, he whispered, the words feeling sacred on his tongue. He looked at Sensei with an expression of pure, shining adoration. This man, this stranger, had saved him. He was a saint. A true hero. A minor telekinetic ability, Sensei explained calmly. Weak, but versatile. With practice and your brilliant mind you will find it has many applications. It will be enough to give you an edge, enough to pass the entrance exam for a certain prestigious hero academy, I should think. UA. He could get into UA. He could stand on the same starting line as everyone else. Thank you? Izuku sobbed, bowing low, over and over again. Thank you, Sensei. I'll never forget this. I'll become a hero you can be proud of. I swear it. I know you will, Izuku-kun, Sensei said, his voice filled with that same warm, paternal tone. I will be watching. The words, at the time, had been a comfort. A promise of mentorship. He didn't realize then that they were a literal, inescapable truth. The lie had a honeymoon period. The next few months were the happiest of Izuku's life. He trained his new quirk in secret, using it to levitate pebbles, then small rocks, then his own notebooks. It was weak. He couldn't lift more than a few kilograms, but it was his. He started filling his analysis notebooks again, this time with a fervent, practical purpose. He studied for the UA written exam until his eyes burned. He was no longer a dreamer. He was a contender. He got into UA. When the acceptance letter arrived, his mother's tears of joy were the sweetest sound he had ever heard. He had done it. He had proved everyone, even All Might, wrong. The night after his acceptance, as he lay in bed, vibrating with excitement for his future, he heard it for the first time. Good work, my boy. He sat bolt upright, his blood turning to ice. The voice was in his head. Smooth, calm, and terrifyingly familiar. He scrambled to turn on his lamp, heart pounding. His room was empty. He must have been dreaming, but the voice came again, clearer this time. Not a dream, Izuku. I told you I would be watching. Sensei? Izuku whispered into the empty room, trembling. Is that you? How are you doing that? The quirk I gave you was not just a gift. It was a key. It allows me a connection to you. A way to see through your eyes, hear through your ears, and offer guidance when you need it most. Guidance. The words sounded sinister now. The warmth he associated with Sensei was gone, replaced by a chilling sense of violation. This man was inside his head. Why? Izuku asked, pulling his knees to his chest. Why didn't you tell me? It was a necessary component of our arrangement, the voice said, its tone losing its gentle edge, becoming more businesslike, colder. You are entering a world of secrets and lies. You will need a mentor who can see the whole board. I am that mentor. The next day, a small, unmarked package arrived at his door. Inside was a simple burner phone and a note, for emergencies. The day after, it buzzed. A text message, a single address for a storage locker across town. The message from the voice in his head was simple. Go. Alone. Terrified but still clinging to the belief that this was some unorthodox form of mentorship, he obeyed. The storage locker was empty save for a single manila envelope on the concrete floor. Inside were photographs. Grainy, long-distance shots. His mother at the grocery store, picking out daikon. His mother hanging laundry on their apartment balcony, a clothespin in her mouth. His mother walking home from her part-time job, her face tired but smiling. A wave of nausea and primal fear washed over him. This wasn't mentorship. This was a threat. You see, Izuku, the voice said, its calm tone now dripping with menace. Our arrangement is a delicate one. I have given you your dream. In return, you will provide me with information. Observations. You will be my eyes and ears inside UA. And you will do so without question. Because if you do not, if you ever think of betraying my generosity, I will know. And the consequences for your lovely, fragile mother will be unpleasant. The voice painted a brief, horrifying picture. A gas leak. A faulty wire. A tragic, random mugging gone wrong. All untraceable. All so very simple for a man of his resources. The world tilted on its axis. The kind benefactor, the gentle sensei, the man who had saved him, dissolved into a monster. The quirk he had cherished was not a gift, it was a leash. The dream he had achieved was not a victory, it was a gilded cage. Who are you? Izuku choked out, sinking to his knees on the cold concrete, the photos slipping from his numb fingers. There was a moment of silence, a pause that felt pregnant with 1,000 years of darkness. And then the voice gave its name, a name that would haunt Izuku's every waking moment and twisting nightmare. My enemies call me all for one. It was a week later, his soul still numb from the revelation, that the universe decided to play its cruelest joke. The sludge villain incident. Bakugo, trapped, suffocating. The heroes, standing by, unable to act. And Izuku, moving before he could think, his quirkless, heroic soul overriding the terror, throwing his backpack, trying to claw his friend free. And then All Might was there. After the villains were gone and the reporters had been shooed away, All Might found him. But this time, it was different. He saw the fire. He saw the spirit. He saw the boy who ran in when everyone else ran away. And on a quiet side street, amidst the setting sun, All Might, in his skeletal form, deflated his chest and said the words that, a month ago, would have been Izuku's salvation. "You can become a hero!" Izuku stared at him, his mind a maelstrom of horror and despair. "I deem you worthy of my power," All Might said, his voice ringing with a conviction that felt like a death sentence. "My quirk is yours to inherit, one for all. The sacred torch, passed down through generations to fight the ultimate evil. To fight him. All for one. His master." Tears streamed down Izuku's face. All Might saw them as tears of overwhelming joy, of a dream finally realized. He had no idea they were tears of absolute terror. He was being offered the sword meant to slay the dragon, while the dragon held his mother's life in its claws. To refuse would be unthinkable. It would raise questions All Might couldn't answer and alert All for One to his defiance. To accept was to commit the most profound betrayal in the history of heroism. To take this sacred gift, this symbol of hope, and place it directly under the watchful eye of its most hated enemy. He was trapped. Caught between the two most powerful beings on the planet, a pawn in a war he had never asked to join, so he cried. And he accepted. And in that moment, his fate was sealed. He would be two things at once, the successor to the symbol of peace, and the spy for the symbol of evil. A hero with the soul of a traitor. A traitor with the heart of a hero. The memory receded, leaving Izuku shivering in the starched sheets of the nurse's cot. The sterile smell of the room rushed back in, sharp and biting. Uraraka and Ida were still looking at him, their expressions of concern now mingled with confusion at his sudden, bone-deep shudder. "Midoriya? Are you all right?" Ida asked, leaning closer. "Your face is terribly pale." He forced his lips to move, to form a smile. It felt like stretching cold, dead clay. "Why, yeah. Just tired. The adrenaline is wearing off, I guess." The lie tasted familiar. He had been practicing it for 10 months. A shadow fell over his cot. Izuku looked up, and his heart leaped into his throat. It was All Might, in his weakened form, looking impossibly weary, a deep sadness in the hollows of his eyes. But as his gaze fell on Izuku, a flicker of light returned to them. A flicker of pride. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Do you have a moment?" Uraraka and Ida, understanding the need for privacy, bowed respectfully and moved away, rejoining the other students. Izuku was alone with his idol, his mentor, his secret victim. "All Might," Izuku breathed. You were incredible." "No, my boy," All Might said, pulling up a stool and sitting beside the cot. He winced, a motion that spoke of deep, abiding pain. "You were. All of you. Facing that kind of terror, and you fought back. You protected your classmates. That stunt with the whirlpool, reckless, foolish, and absolutely heroic." Every word of praise was a new crack in the fragile dam holding back his guilt. He wanted to confess. The urge was so strong it was a physical pressure in his chest. "I'm sorry, All Might. I'm the reason they were here. I told them you were coming. I'm the traitor. It's me." "Say nothing," the voice of All for One commanded from the silent depths of his mind. It was a cold, sharp shard of ice in the warmth of All Might's presence. "He is weak. Drained. He suspects nothing. Smile and accept his praise. Play the part of the worthy successor." All Might reached out, placing a large, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. The contact was warm, real, and grounding. It was the touch of a father figure, full of pride and affection. It was unbearable. "You have the heart of a true hero, my boy," All Might said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was right to choose you. Through all this darkness, you are the proof that the next generation will be a light. You make me proud." Izuku could feel the phantom presence of All for One, a silent observer to this intimate moment. He could almost feel the villain's amusement, a cold, mocking laughter echoing in the spaces between All Might's earnest words. He felt like a stage for their ancient war, his soul the battleground. He had to say something. He couldn't just accept this. But, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku began, his voice cracking. If I had just been stronger or faster. Stop, All Might said gently but firmly. There is no blame here but on the villains who perpetrated this attack. You did what you could. You saved who you could. That is all any hero can ever do. Izuku looked into the hero's tired blue eyes, and he saw nothing but unwavering belief. This man, the greatest hero the world had ever known, trusted him completely, and he was betraying that trust every second he drew breath. He forced the fake smile back onto his face. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. It was the smile of a boy being torn in two. Thank you, All Might, he whispered. The symbol of peace nodded, squeezing his shoulder one last time before standing up to leave. As he walked away, a pillar of strength even in his broken form, Izuku lay back against the pillow, the smile dissolving from his face, replaced by an expression of utter desolation. He was alone in the crowd, the weight of two masters pressing down on him, threatening to grind his very soul to dust. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the USJ was not the end. It was only the beginning. In the weeks following the USJ attack, a fragile semblance of normalcy returned to UA. The sun still rose, classes still convened, and the endless cycle of heroic theory and practical training ground on. But beneath the surface, the school held its breath. The shattered dome of the unforeseen simulation joint stood as a constant, glittering reminder of their vulnerability. Security was heightened, with state-of-the-art sensors and hulking metal gates turning the campus into a fortress. The teachers were more vigilant, their gazes lingering a moment longer on the horizon, on the shadows in the corners. For Izuku, this new atmosphere of tense caution was a personal hell. Every security upgrade, every new patrol route discussed in class, was another piece of information he was forced to meticulously catalog. His notebooks, once a source of joy and aspiration, had become his ledger of treason. The voice of All for One was a constant, low hum in the back of his mind, a silent taskmaster demanding details. The response time of the new gate system? The range of the quirk-detecting sensors at the perimeter? The emotional state of All Might? He would feed it information, carefully curated truths mixed with subtle omissions. He became a master of the half-truth, the plausible deniability. He'd describe the gate's speed but forget to mention the manual override system Aizawa had pointed out. He'd detail the sensor's range but overlook the fact they were calibrated to ignore student quirk signatures leaving campus grounds. It was a terrifying tightrope walk, lying to the most intelligent and malevolent being he could imagine, all while praying his deceptions were subtle enough not to be noticed. Every moment of silence from the voice was a moment of agonizing suspense. Was he believed? Or was Sensei simply letting him weave his own noose? Then came the announcement of the UA Sports Festival. For the rest of Class 1A, it was a thunderclap of opportunity. A chance to rebound, to show the world that the villains hadn't broken them. A chance to shine on a national stage, to catch the eye of pro heroes and launch their future careers. The classroom buzzed with an electric, competitive energy that was a stark contrast to the grim tension of the preceding weeks. For Izuku, the announcement was a death knell. He saw the festival not as a stage, but as a crucible. It was a massive, televised intelligence-gathering operation, and he was the designated spy. This will be your most important assignment to date, Izuku, the voice of All for One had purred in his mind the night of the announcement. It was the first time Sensei had spoken in days, and the sound made Izuku drop the pencil he was using to sketch a new support item design. Millions will be watching. The best and brightest of the next generation of heroes, all showcasing their abilities for the world to see. I want a full and complete analysis of every promising candidate. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their psychological profiles, their fighting styles. Everything. You will be my scout, my analyst, my personal database. Do not disappoint me. The weight of the command was crushing. He wasn't just being asked to observe. He was being ordered to create a hit list, to meticulously paint targets on the backs of his friends, his rivals, the people who were starting to feel like his family. Every fight he participated in, Every match he watched from the stands would be through the cold, calculating lens of his master. The opening ceremony was a blur of noise and color. The roar of the crowd in the massive stadium was a physical force, pressing in on him. He stood with his class, a sea of determined faces around him, and felt like a ghost. He could feel Uraraka vibrating with nervous excitement beside him, could see Ida's rigid posture, could hear Bakugo's low growl of anticipation. They saw a competition. He saw a harvest, Midnight's provocative announcement, Bakugo's arrogant and inflammatory opening pledge, it all washed over him. His focus was a frantic, internal monologue of terror and responsibility. He had to perform well enough to stay in the competition, to get close to the strongest opponents. But he also had to be careful. Every use of One for All would be scrutinized not just by the heroes in the stands, but by the ultimate villain in his head. Damage to the vessel is inefficient, Sensei had warned him. Control your power. A broken tool is a useless one. The first event, the obstacle race, was a frantic exercise in controlled chaos. He used his wits, his athleticism, and a desperate, last-minute application of One for All, a controlled explosion using a discarded piece of metal from the robots, to soar into first place. The crowd erupted. He landed, his legs screaming in protest but unbroken, and stumbled across the finish line. He had won. The praise from his classmates was a torrent he couldn't deflect. But as he stood there, panting, he felt the cold satisfaction of the voice in his mind. A clever application. You are learning. Now, observe the others. The ice user is of particular interest. As is the boy with the explosions. He was forced to stand at the finish line and watch as Todoroki effortlessly froze the last stretch of the course, as Bakugo propelled himself over it with practiced ease. He wasn't just watching his rivals, he was taking notes, for their future destruction, his analytical mind working against his will, cataloging their movements, their power outputs, the subtle tells in their expressions. The cavalry battle was even worse. He was the 10 million point target, the pariah of the event. He saw the predatory gleam in his classmates' eyes and knew it was a pale imitation of the predatory gaze currently fixed on all of them through his own. He teamed up with Uraraka, Tokoemi, and the support course student, Mei Hatsum. It was a team born of desperation and synergy, a perfect example of heroic cooperation. And all the while, he was analyzing Tokoemi's dark shadow. Powerful, but its strength is inversely proportional to the amount of light. A significant weakness in daylight, but what about at night? Or underground? Note its emotional connection to its host, Hatsum's support items. Ingenious, but overly flashy. She prioritizes showcasing her babies over pure efficiency. A potential exploit for an opponent focused on subtlety. Uraraka's zero gravity. Touch-based. Limited by her physical stamina, which causes nausea. What is her weight limit? How long can she maintain it on multiple objects? They fought valiantly. The climax of the battle saw his team pitted against Todoroki's. He saw the cold fire in Todoroki's eyes, the effortless power, as he unleashed waves of ice. He felt the chill not just on his skin, but in his soul. This was the boy Sensei was most interested in. The son of endeavor. In a last-ditch effort, as Todoroki's flames erupted for the first time, a shocking, instinctual blast to ward off dark shadow, Izuki used One for All to smash away a wall of ice, allowing them to secure a different headband and squeak into the final round. He had succeeded. He had advanced. But the cost was another entry in his mental ledger for All for One. So, the boy has fire as well. How fascinating. Endeavor's masterpiece. I want to know everything about him. His history. The source of his anger. The reason he refuses to use his left side. Get closer to him. The order was absolute. The final tournament bracket was revealed, and Izuku's blood ran cold when he saw the matchup. Midoriya versus Todoroki. The air in the waiting room was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the upcoming fight. Todoroki stood on the opposite side of the room, his presence a vortex of cold, silent fury. He had sought Izuku out, cornered him in the hallway, and delivered a chilling declaration of war, revealing the tragic story of his birth, his abusive father, and his vow to win using only his mother's ice. Izuku sat on the bench, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. The story had horrified him. The tale of a child forged into a tool, a vessel for a parent's ambition, resonated with him on a terrifyingly deep level. Todoroki was a prisoner of endeavor. Izuku was a prisoner of all for one. They were two sides of the same cursed coin. "This is a perfect opportunity," the voice of Sensei murmured, cool and predatory. "Provoke him. Push him. I want to see the full extent of his fire quirk. I want to see Endeavor's creation unleashed. Do not hold back." The command made him feel sick. All for One didn't care about Todoroki's pain. He saw it only as a tool, a key to unlocking more power, more data. He was being ordered to emotionally torment a fellow victim for the benefit of his captor. As he walked out into the arena, the roar of the crowd was a distant, meaningless hum. He saw Todoroki on the other side of the concrete stage, his expression a mask of cold resolve. He saw Endeavor in the stands, a towering figure of flame and ambition, his gaze fixed on his son like a hawk. And Izuku felt the unseen gaze of All for One, watching through his eyes, hungry for the spectacle to come. This fight was not about winning. It was about something far more complicated. It was about defiance. The match began. Todoroki didn't hesitate. A tidal wave of jagged, crystalline ice surged across the arena floor, a glacier born in an instant. It was a display of overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying power. Izuku responded instinctively, channeling One for All into his finger. Smash! The shockwave obliterated the ice wave, but the force shattered his finger, sending a bolt of agony up his arm. The crowd gasped. He could feel All for One's disapproval, a cold spike of annoyance at the damaged hardware. Todoroki sent another wave, larger and faster. Izuku smashed it with another finger, the pain multiplying. And another. And another. One by one, he sacrificed the fingers of his right hand, turning them into broken, useless appendages to counter the relentless tide of ice. "You're trembling, Midoriya," Todoroki said, his voice flat, his breath pluming in the unnaturally cold air. "You're hurting yourself to this extent, just to fight me? What did my father say to you?" Izuku, cradling his mangled hand, looked up at his opponent. He saw the pain in Todoroki's eyes, the self-loathing warring with his cold fury. He saw the boy who was deliberately fighting with one hand tied behind his back, mutilating his own potential out of spite for his father. He saw himself. What is he waiting for? Sensei's voice hissed in his mind. Why does he only use the ice? Make him use the fire. The order aligned perfectly with a desperate, heroic impulse rising in Izuku's own heart. He wasn't just going to fight Todoroki. He was going to save him. He had to. If he could save Todoroki from his father's shadow, maybe, just maybe, there was hope he could one day save himself from his own. "I'm not holding back!" Izuku screamed, his voice raw with emotion and pain. He switched hands, ready to sacrifice his left. "Because I want to meet your expectations. I want to be the kind of hero who can live up to everyone's hopes. And to do that, I have to win." He charged forward, channeling One for All into his already broken finger, unleashing another smash directly at Todoroki. The blast of air forced Todoroki to create a wall of ice to defend himself. "You're fighting with only half your power!" Izuku yelled, his voice cracking. He was no longer just talking to Todoroki. He was screaming at himself, at the lies he was forced to live, at the power he held but couldn't fully claim. Everyone is giving it their all. To win and get closer to their dream, to fight with everything they have. How can you stand there and say you'll win with just half your strength? Todoroki's face contorted in a snarl. "It was my old man who bought you off, wasn't it? Now I'm just getting angrier." He unleashed his most powerful ice attack yet, a mountain of ice that threatened to engulf the entire stage. Izuku met it head-on. He channeled One for All into his entire arm, knowing the consequences. Smash! The explosion of force was immense. The ice mountain shattered. The backlash, however, was catastrophic. His left arm broke in multiple places, the bones grinding together. The pain was so intense it stole his breath. He was a wreck. Both hands were mangled, his left arm was useless. He had almost nothing left to give. He saw the frost creeping up Todoroki's right side, a physical manifestation of his over-reliance on his ice quirk. He was slowing down. He was reaching his limit. He is weakened, All for One observed clinically. Now is your chance to win. End it. But Izuku ignored the voice. Winning wasn't the point anymore. That's why I'm going to win! Izuku screamed, tears of pain and empathy streaming down his face. He staggered forward, a broken puppet animated by sheer willpower. I will surpass you! His words, meant for Todoroki, were a desperate prayer to himself. I'm projecting? Todoroki whispered, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified realization as he looked at Izuku's shattered form. It's your power, isn't it? Izuku bellowed, the words tearing from his soul. It was a question he was asking himself. This power, one for all, is it mine? Or does it belong to the legacy I'm betraying? The dam broke. Not just in Izuku's heart, but in Todoroki's. A memory flashed in Todoroki's eyes, his mother, her gentle words of encouragement, telling him he could be the hero he wanted to be. The fire wasn't his father's curse. It was a part of him, and then it erupted. A magnificent, explosive torrent of orange and red flame burst from Todoroki's left side, melting the glacier on the stage in an instant. The heat was a living thing, a declaration of self-acceptance. The crowd roared. Endeavor bellowed in triumph, and Izuku smiled. A genuine, pained, victorious smile. He had done it. He had saved him. In his mind, All for One was ecstatic. Yes. This is it. The full power. The fusion of ice and fire. Magnificent. The two boys, one broken and one whole for the first time, prepared for their final clash. Todoroki, surrounded by a maelstrom of ice and fire. Izuku, channeling the last dregs of One for All into his broken, bleeding right arm, his entire body screaming in protest. Thank you, Midoriya, Todoroki said, a small, genuine smile on his face. I'm grateful. They charged. Fire met the gale force of a final, desperate smash. The resulting explosion was a thermonuclear event. The stadium shook. The shockwave ripped through the concrete stage, blasting both of them backwards. Cementos and Midnight were forced to intervene, creating walls to contain the cataclysmic blast. When the smoke cleared, Izuku lay unconscious against the outer wall, his body a broken mess. Todoroki was still standing, barely, his left side smoking. He was the winner. Izuku had lost the match. But he felt, in the last moments of his consciousness, that he had won something far more important. He woke up in Recovery Girl's office again. This time, the damage was far more severe. His entire body was a tapestry of pain. His left arm and right hand were in heavy casts, his fingers surgically repaired. The prognosis was grim. More surgeries would be needed, and there was a chance of permanent damage if he continued to be this reckless. The door opened and All Might entered, his face a mask of profound disappointment and worry. Young Midoriya, what were you thinking? He asked, his voice heavy. I had to. Izuku mumbled through a dry mouth. Todoroki-kun, he was in pain. I couldn't just beat him. I had to save him. All Might sighed, a long, weary sound. Your desire to save people is your greatest strength, my boy. But you cannot save others if you destroy yourself. There is a fine line between self-sacrifice and self-destruction. Today you crossed it. The lecture continued, but Izuku's attention was divided. All for One was silent, but he could feel the villain's contentment. He had gotten what he wanted, a full, unrestrained display of one of the most powerful quirks of the next generation. The cost was acceptable, the voice finally said, as if sensing his thoughts. The data is worth the temporary damage to the vessel. You performed your duty admirably. You pushed him, just as I commanded. The words twisted the heroic act into something ugly and transactional. Izuku's defiance, his genuine desire to help Todoroki, had been nothing more than him following orders. He hadn't saved Todoroki. He had exploited him. The realization was a fresh wave of nausea that had nothing to do with his injuries. He was released just in time to watch the final award ceremony from the stands, a bandaged, broken figure. He watched as Bakugo, chained to the podium and screaming in a furious rage, was awarded first place. Todoroki stood in second, his expression no longer cold, but thoughtful and complex. As midnight presented the medals, Izuku's burner phone, silent for weeks, vibrated in his pocket. He paled, knowing what it meant. A new directive. A new report required. He excused himself, claiming he needed to use the restroom, and limped into a deserted hallway. He pulled out the phone. There was a single new message. It wasn't a question or a command. It was a file, a detailed analysis. His heart pounded as he opened it. It was his own analysis, the one he had been mentally composing throughout the festival, transcribed into neat, clinical text. Subject: Shoto Todoroki. Quirk: half-cold, half-hot. Strengths: overwhelming elemental power. Large-scale environmental control. Potential for devastating combination attacks. Weaknesses: psychological trauma linked to fire abilities. Over-reliance on ice leads to frost buildup and reduced speed. Emotional state is a key vulnerability, susceptible to goading regarding his father, Endeavor. Subject: Katsuki Bakugo. Quirk: explosion. Strengths: high mobility and destructive power. Glandular sweat acts as a fuel source, allowing for sustained combat. Highly intelligent and strategic fighter despite aggressive demeanor. Weaknesses: pride. Easily angered, can be led into traps. Requires sweat to create explosions, may be less effective in cold environments, or after prolonged exertion. Close-range fighter, vulnerable to long-range attacks. It went on and on. Tokoemi. Kirishima. Ida. All his classmates, all his friends, their deepest strengths and most exploitable weaknesses laid bare, written in a cold, detached tone he didn't recognize as his own. It was the report of a predator studying its prey. At the bottom of the file was a single line of text from Sensei: a good start. Your observations are astute. I have taken the liberty of compiling your thoughts. Send this file to the following encrypted address. It is for Tamura's edification. He needs to learn to think more strategically. Izuku stared at the screen, his hands trembling. This was it. The final act of betrayal. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was actively writing the playbook for the League of Villains. He was taking the trust and camaraderie of the sports festival and weaponizing it. He stood in the empty hallway, the distant cheers from the stadium echoing like the jeers of a hostile crowd. On the screen was a simple send button. A single tap would deliver this poison. A single tap would paint targets on the backs of everyone he cared about. He thought of refusing. He thought of throwing the phone against the wall, smashing it to pieces. And then he thought of the grainy photos of his mother. His thumb hovered over the screen, shaking. He was a hero in training, the successor to All Might, the boy who wanted to save everyone with a smile. And he was about to give the villains the keys to the kingdom. He closed his eyes, a single, hot tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He pressed send. As he walked back toward the stands, the roar of the crowd felt hollow and distant. He caught All Might's eye, and the hero gave him a small, encouraging nod. Izuku felt nothing. The gilded cage of the sports festival had closed around him, and its bars were forged from his own analysis, his own betrayal, his own broken dream. And in the silence of his mind, he heard the faint, chilling whisper of his master's voice. Good work. Now, about the hero killer. The week of hero internships was supposed to be a glimpse into the future. It was a tangible step from the classroom to the streets. A chance to walk alongside seasoned professionals and learn what it truly meant to be a hero. His classmates buzzed with excitement, comparing offers from famous agencies, their chatter filled with names like Best Jeanist, Gunhead, and Ryukyu. For Izuku, the selection process was another agonizing charade. Despite his destructive performance at the sports festival, the raw power and selfless drive he displayed had attracted a surprising number of offers. He sifted through them, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. Each name represented a potential new stream of intelligence, for All for One. Choosing an agency wasn't about finding the best teacher. It was about selecting the most strategically valuable observation post. The fourth kind agency is too focused on civil service, the voice of All for One mused in his mind as he reviewed the list. Ryukyu's team deals primarily with large-scale disasters, which are unpredictable. You need to be somewhere with consistent street-level activity. A place where the lines between heroics and violence blur. Then, a name on the list jumped out, both to him and to the silent observer in his head. Gran Torino. All Might's former teacher. The man who had helped shape the symbol of peace. All Might himself had recommended it, suggesting that the diminutive, elderly hero could help Izuku master the treacherous power of One for All. It was a perfect cover, a logical, character-driven choice that would raise no suspicion. And for All for One, it was an irresistible opportunity. Yes, the voice purred with a chilling satisfaction. The teacher of your master. An invaluable source of insight into One for All's history and All Might's own formative weaknesses. Accept his offer. Learn everything you can. From both of them. So, Izuku found himself on a bullet train, watching the cityscapes blur past his window, heading toward a destiny he didn't want. He was meant to be learning control, but his true mission was espionage. He was a student sent to spy on his own grandmaster. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. His internship began not with a patrol or a lecture, but with a series of brutal, one-sided beatings. Gran Torino was a yellow and white blur of incomprehensible speed, his jet quirk turning him into a human pinball ricocheting off every surface of his cluttered, taiyaki-strewn apartment. He dismantled Izuku's every attempt to use One for All, his sharp critiques cutting deeper than his physical blows. You're too stiff. You treat the power like a special move, not a part of yourself. You revere it too much. The old hero rasped, zipping past to land a solid kick to Izuku's back. The criticism struck a nerve far deeper than Gran Torino could ever know. Izuku did revere One for All. He revered it as the sacred trust he was actively defiling. He treated it like a special occasion because every time he used it, he felt the phantom gaze of All for One dissecting its nature, a sacrilegious study of a holy text. The power didn't feel like a part of him. It felt like a borrowed treasure he was simultaneously guarding and selling off piece by piece. But through the pain and the humiliation, a breakthrough came. The taiyaki and the microwave analogy, the simple yet profound idea of letting the power flow through him constantly instead of channeling it into single, destructive bursts. He imagined the energy, not as a loaded gun, but as the blood in his veins. He activated it. 5%. The change was immediate. A soft green lightning crackled around him, a gentle hum of power that didn't threaten to shatter his bones. He could move faster, jump higher, react quicker. It wasn't the overwhelming force of a smash, but a constant, controlled enhancement. It was full cowling. It was control. For a fleeting moment, a spark of genuine joy ignited within him. He had done it. He had taken a step toward mastering his quirk, toward becoming the hero he was supposed to be. Fascinating, the voice of All for One murmured, breaking the spell. The tone was one of intense academic interest, like a scientist observing a new form of cellular mitosis. So this is how the power can be tempered. Not as a singular explosion, but as a sustained current. This changes many of my previous theories on its application. Excellent work, Izuku. You are a more useful research subject than any of the previous wielders. The joy curdled into ash. Even his moments of personal triumph were not his own. They were just data points for his enemy. His every success was a victory for the villain who haunted his every step. Their patrols through the streets of Hosu were a strange dance. Izuku, buzzing with the low-level energy of full cowling, leaped from rooftop to rooftop, trying to keep up with the ricocheting form of Gran Torino. He was learning, adapting, his body slowly acclimating to the constant thrum of power. He helped stop a purse snatching, assisted in a minor traffic accident, the mundane, everyday heroism he had always dreamed of. But as they moved through the city, the atmosphere began to change. The usual urban bustle was overlaid with a palpable tension. The news was dominated by one story, the hero-killer stain. Reports of his attacks on pro-heroes were spreading like a virus, infecting the city with fear. His brutal, self-righteous crusade against false heroes was the topic of every hushed conversation, and he was operating in Hosu. The night it all went wrong, they were on a train heading back from a patrol in a neighboring ward. The air was still, the carriage lights humming softly. Izuku was staring out the window, his reflection a ghostly image superimposed over the dark city, when his burner phone vibrated silently in his pocket. He stiffened, his blood running cold. Gran Torino was dozing in the seat opposite him. Izuku feigned a yawn and stretched, subtly angling his body away from the old hero as he palmed the phone. He shielded the screen with his hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was a message from the encrypted address, a relay from Shigaraki. Izuku knew All for One could see it through his eyes, but this was a direct order, a task assigned to the League. Hosu. Tonight. Unleash the children. Purge the fakes. Chaos. Beneath the almost childishly simple message was a string of coordinates. Izuku's eyes widened in horror. And then came the clear, cold command from All for One in his mind. Tamura is making his move. He intends to unleash several of the Nomu you observed at the USJ into the city. His goal is to create widespread panic and destruction, to show the world that heroes cannot protect them, and to eclipse the fame of the hero killer. Your orders are simple, observe. Gather data on the Nomu's performance in an urban environment. Record the response times of the local heroes. Do not, under any circumstances, interfere. The train lurched to a violent, screeching halt. A moment later, the side of the carriage exploded inward in a shower of twisted metal and shattered glass. A pro-hero, his costume torn and bloody, was thrown through the opening, landing in a heap on the floor. He was followed by a nightmare. It was a Nomu. Not the hulking purple brute from the USJ, but a leaner, winged creature with 4 eyes and razor-sharp talons. It shrieked, a sound that grated on the soul, and fixed its dead eyes on the downed hero. Chaos erupted. Passengers screamed and scrambled away. Gran Torino was on his feet in an instant, a yellow blur of motion. "Stay back, kid!" he yelled, and then he was gone, engaging the winged beast in a dizzying high-speed battle within the confines of the train. Izuku was frozen, his mind a battlefield. Observe. Do not interfere. The command was absolute. This was Shigaraki's party, an event he was meant to witness as a silent spectator. To disobey was to risk everything. His mother. His fragile cover. His life. Then his personal phone buzzed. He ripped it from his pocket, his hands shaking. It was a text message from Ida. Just a single, stark piece of information. A location. An address in Hosu. Izuku stared at the screen, and the world fell away. He knew that address. It was from the news reports. It was the alley where the pro-hero native had been attacked by the hero killer just an hour ago. And Ida, whose brother Tensei had been brutally crippled by Stain, had chosen an internship in Hosu. He wasn't training. He was hunting. He was walking into a trap, armed with nothing but grief and vengeance. "Ida, you idiot!" Izuku whispered, his voice trembling with a dawning, sickening horror. He looked up. Gran Torino was expertly weaving around the Nomu, his movements too fast for the creature to track. But then, a second Nomu, a 4-on brute, tore its way through the roof of the train. Explosions rocked the city outside. The attack had begun. Hosu was on fire. He had a choice. A terrible, impossible choice. Obey his master and watch the city burn, watch his friend walk to his death. Or defy the monster in his head and become the hero he was supposed to be? He is not your concern, All for One's voice stated, cold and final. The Ingenium boy is irrelevant. The data is what matters. Observe the chaos. Izuku looked at the phone in his hand, at the address that was surely the site of his friend's impending doom. He looked at the fires blooming against the night sky. He saw the terror on the faces of the civilians. He saw the ghost of his younger self, the quirkless boy who ran toward the sludge villain without a second thought. In that moment, something inside him snapped. The fear, the guilt, the crushing weight of his duplicity, it was all consumed by a single, blazing emotion. Rage. A pure, righteous fury not just at the villains, but at himself, at the monster who had turned him into this cowardly, broken thing. To hell with the data. To hell with the mission. To hell with All for One. He wasn't a spy. He wasn't a pawn. He was a hero. "Gran Torino!" he yelled over the din. "Ida is in trouble. I have to go." Before the old hero could even process his words, Izuku activated full cowling at a reckless 7%. Green lightning crackled around him, and he shot out of the hole in the side of the train, a human bullet fired into the heart of the burning city. "You dare defy me?" The voice of All for One was no longer calm or clinical. It was a roar of frigid, absolute rage that slammed into his consciousness like a physical blow. The pressure in his skull intensified tenfold. It felt like his brain was being squeezed in a vice. Black spots danced in his vision. You will regret this, Izuku. I will make you watch as I tear down everything you hold dear, starting with your mother. A phantom image flooded his mind, his mother's apartment door splintering, a dark shape stepping through. He cried out, stumbling as he landed on a rooftop, the mental assault nearly crippling him. But he didn't stop. He pushed the image away, fueled by a desperate, suicidal defiance. You can't stop me! He screamed into the empty air, into his own head. I won't let my friend die! He leaped from rooftop to rooftop, a frantic green spark against the backdrop of orange flames. The address from Ida's phone was his only guide. He ignored the rampaging Nomu, the sounds of fighting, the screams from the streets below. They were a horrifying symphony of the chaos he was partially responsible for, but he couldn't stop for them. He could only save one person. He had to save one. It was the only atonement he could grasp. He found the alley. It was dark, narrow, and smelled of blood. The scene was a tableau of grim justice. The pro-hero native was slumped against a wall, bleeding from multiple wounds. Ida was on the ground, his silver armor slashed and dented, a sword blade pinning his arm to the asphalt, and standing over them was the hero killer, Stain. He was a terrifying figure, all tattered red cloth and jagged blades, his unnervingly long tongue lolling from behind his mask. His eyes, visible through the slits, burned with a terrifying, zealous light. You and your brother are fakes! Stain rasped, his voice a low, gravelly hiss. You are driven by vengeance and personal gain, not true heroism. You must be purged. He raised a blood-slicked katana, preparing to deliver the killing blow to Ida. Stop! Izuku shot down from the rooftop, a green meteor of righteous fury. He pulled back his fist, channeling 5% of One for All into it. Smash! He didn't aim for Stain himself. He aimed for the man's sword hand. The punch connected with a satisfying crack. The force sent Stain stumbling back, his sword clattering to the ground. Izuku landed between the villain and his friends, his body thrumming with power and terror. Midoriya? Ida gasped, his face a mask of disbelief and shame. What are you doing here? This is my fight. Don't get involved. A hero's job is to meddle where they're not wanted. Izuku shot back, quoting a line he'd heard a dozen times, the words feeling more true now than ever before. He stood his ground, facing the legendary hero killer. His mind was screaming, half from the pressure of All for One's unabated fury, half from the sheer terror of the situation. Stain looked at him, his head cocked. Another one. But your eyes, they are different. They hold true conviction. You are worthy. He licked the blood from his blade where it had nicked Ida. Ida's body went rigid then fell limp. Paralyzed. His quirk, bloodcurdle, Izuku's analytical mind supplied, working on autopilot even through the pain. He ingests a person's blood to paralyze them. The duration depends on blood type. I will kill them, Stain said calmly. But I will spare you. Now leave. No, Izuku said, his voice shaking but firm. He dropped into a fighting stance, green lightning dancing around him. I won't let you kill anyone else. The fight was a desperate, terrifying dance. Izuku was faster, stronger, but Stain was a master of combat. His movements were unpredictable, his blades a whirlwind of deadly precision. Izuku leaped and dodged, using full cowling to ricochet off the narrow alley walls, trying to land a decisive blow without getting cut. A single scratch could be the end of him. He was outmatched. Stain was a killer, a specialist. Izuku was a student, a child playing a man's game. The mental assault from All for One was relentless, a throbbing migraine that clouded his judgment and sapped his strength. You chose this. You chose to sacrifice yourself for this worthless boy. When he is dead, and you are bleeding out in this alley, remember that you could have prevented it. Remember that your mother's fate is now sealed. A blade sliced through the air, and Izuku dodged a fraction too late. The steel grazed his cheek, drawing a line of fire and a trickle of blood. He stumbled back, his heart seizing with terror. Stain's tongue lashed out. Suddenly, a torrent of fire filled the alley. Stain leaped back with a hiss, avoiding the flames. Izuku looked up, his eyes wide. Shoto Todoroki stood at the entrance to the alley, his left side wreathed in brilliant orange flame, his right hand frosting the ground beneath him. "Midoriya," Todoroki said, his voice calm and steady. "You seem to be in a habit of getting into trouble. I got your location message. It's a good thing you're a terrible texter and sent it to everyone." Relief washed over Izuku so powerfully his knees almost buckled. He wasn't alone. "Todoroki-kun! Don't let him ingest your blood! It's how he paralyzes people!" Izuku yelled. With Todoroki's help, the tide of the battle turned. They were a surprisingly effective team. Todoroki's long-range attacks of fire and ice kept Stain at a distance, creating openings, while Izuku used full cowling to dart in for close-range attacks. They fought for their lives, for Ida's life, in the grimy, blood-soaked alley. Ida, still paralyzed but able to speak, watched them, his voice choked with shame. "Stop! Please stop! I've already lost the right to be a hero. This has nothing to do with you two. If you want us to stop, then stand up!" Todoroki yelled back, erecting a massive wall of ice to block a volley of thrown knives. "Look properly at what you want to be." His words, like Izuku's at the sports festival, hit their mark. Ida struggled, fighting against the paralysis, his engine quirks sputtering weakly. They managed to disarm Stain, to pin him down. Just as it seemed they had won, a knife Stain had hidden in his boots slashed across Todoroki's arm. Stain lunged, his tongue extended, ready to taste the blood and paralyze their strongest fighter. But then Ida moved. With a roar of effort, he overcame the paralysis, his recipro burst flaring to life. He shot forward, his armored leg intercepting Stain's lunge, and delivered a powerful kick that sent the villain reeling. The three of them stood together, a trinity of battered, bruised, but unbroken heroes. Working in tandem, they overwhelmed the hero killer, landing a final series of blows that knocked him unconscious. It was over. They had done the impossible. They had defeated the hero killer. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and shouting voices. Pro-heroes, including Gran Torino and Endeavor, flooded the alley. The boys were whisked away, their injuries tended to by paramedics. As they were being loaded into ambulances, a winged gnome swooped down from the sky, its talons extended, snatching Izuku from his stretcher. He was airborne, helpless, the wind whipping past him. He could only watch as the ground receded. Then, a shade shot past him. Stain. He had broken free. He had licked the blood from the gnome's exposed brain matter, paralyzing it. He drove a knife into the creature's skull, killing it instantly. They fell from the sky, crashing onto the street below. Stain stood over the dead gnome, his ribs broken, a lung punctured. He stood before the assembled pro-heroes, a terrifying, indomitable figure of conviction. "You fakes!" he growled, his voice amplified by a terrifying aura of pure bloodlust that paralyzed everyone, heroes and civilians alike. "I must make things right. Someone must stain themselves with blood. The word hero must be restored. Come on. Just try and get me, you fakes. The only one I'll let kill me is the true hero. All might." He stood there, a specter of judgment, until his own injuries finally claimed him, and he collapsed, unconscious. In the hospital, the three boys shared a room, their bodies bandaged and broken. The mood was somber. Hosa's chief of police, Kenji Tsurigami, laid out the grim reality. Because they had used their quirks without licenses and against a villain the pros couldn't handle, their heroic act had to be swept under the rug. The official report would state that Endeavor had defeated the hero killer. They would receive no credit, no fame. Ida, his arm in a cast and his spirit humbled, accepted it gracefully. Todoroki was indifferent. Izuku simply nodded, a profound, soul-deep weariness settling over him. He hadn't done it for the credit. He had done it because he had to. It was a single, pure act of heroism in a life that was becoming a tapestry of lies. A stain of honor on a sullied soul. Later that night, when the room was dark and quiet, the voice returned. All for One was not yelling anymore. The rage was gone, replaced by a silence more terrifying than any shouting. It was a cold, heavy silence that pressed down on Izuku, full of unspoken threats. For hours, there was nothing. Izuku lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the verdict. Finally, the voice came, not as a command, but as a soft, chilling whisper. You have been a disappointment, Izuku. You defied a direct order. You jeopardized the mission. You revealed a surprising degree of emotional attachment to your so-called friends. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself. However, the voice continued, a new, thoughtful tone entering it. Your defiance, while infuriating, has yielded interesting results. You provided an unsanctioned field test of your new abilities against a high-level opponent. You demonstrated an unexpected capacity for inspiring loyalty in others, like the Endeavor boy, and you inadvertently handed us a wealth of information on the hero killer's ideology and quirk, which Tamura will find most useful for his recruitment efforts. The voice was reframing his heroic act, twisting his defiance into an accidental success for the villain's cause. It was a psychological masterstroke, designed to rob him of even this small, personal victory. You are a wild card. Unpredictable. This makes you both a liability and a potentially greater asset. I will not punish your mother, yet. Your leash was simply too long. From now on, it will be shorter. Your assignments will be more direct. Your compliance will be absolute. Consider this your final warning. The presence receded, leaving Izuku alone in the dark, trembling. He had won. He had saved his friend. He had survived. But he had not escaped. He had only tightened the collar around his own neck. Gran Torino entered the room, his expression unreadable. He walked over to Izuku's bed. You're a real piece of work, kid, the old hero said, his voice a low grumble. You act like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, like you're running from something that's chasing you even when you're standing still. The comment was so accurate, so perceptive, it felt like a physical blow. Izuku couldn't meet his gaze. He just stared out the hospital window at the reflection of his own haunted face, at the boy who was more trapped now than ever before. He had tasted true heroism for one night, and the price was a lifetime of deeper servitude.